The hour was very late, much later than she realized. It was downright black in the house, save one single candle in the corner of the bedroom. She leaned on the railing, watching the sleepy street from the height of the balcony. The darkness was not frightening. She had grown up in the country with 3 brothers. They had climbed the wide live oaks that grew to run along the ground near their home. They would stay outside until the fireflies were lighting up in the field. And this was New Orleans, a city she had always wanted to see. And why not spend this one night with Jacques? He was beautiful, civilized, gifted, and charmed her so. He was a man of a certain age, old enough to know if it was a wife he wanted or just a lover for the night. She would be obliged to be either, for all the riches he seemed to have, and he did seem to be very rich and well-to-do. She turned around to face the bedroom doors as Jacques came gliding out onto the balcony. He looked as a ghost would, almost floating forward with a glass of wine for her. She took the glass from him, smiling, and took a long sip and let the fluid dance softly on her ruby lips, hoping to entice him to a kiss. It worked, as he grabbed her gently yet hungrily behind her head to bring her to a passionate kiss. She kissed him back just as hungry, putting the glass on a nearby table. His kisses were deep and longing, and his arms held her in a locked embrace that scarcely let her breathe. He moved his hungry mouth to her chin, then her neck, her shoulder. Then, as she swooned and let him do what he wanted, his mouth went back to her neck, right where he could feel her pulse under his lips. A searing pain ripped into her neck as he clamped onto her neck with his teeth. Reflexively, she screamed. A few heads on the street turned toward the house, but, because of the large oak, they could not see clearly the balcony. The girl could not hear the commotion of people coming to see Jacques mercilessly chewing at her neck. She struggled and fought him. She wriggled out enough of his grasp to feel that her knee was right between his legs. With all of her might, she cocked back her leg and rammed her knee straight between his legs. Jacques let go immediately and fell to his knees. He hollered after her as she frantically bunched up her skirts and climbed over the banister. She could hear him trying to stand to his feet as she reached for a nearby branch. It was too far away, and as he gathered himself, she saw him hurrying to her on the edge of the balcony. She made the decision that it could not wait. She gathered her skirts again, said a very quick prayer, and flung herself toward the branch. She touched it, but only briefly, as she fell to the ground. Pain shot through both her legs and sent a white-hot light behind her eyes. As she lay on the ground, looking up the balcony, she saw Jacques looking at her for a second. Then he noticed a crowd was slowly making their way toward her. He backed away and disappeared. That was when the people who had watched as she fell to the ground came to her aid. She was rushed off to a hospital, where she received the best care available. All the while, police came and went asking her who the man was. She had no idea, really, only that they had met at a pub that night. He was a gentleman and invited her to his home. She had never done such a thing, but he was so charming and educated. His conversation was the most stimulating that she had ever encountered. She was bewitched by him, and she ignored that little voice that tries to warn you of danger, because she was a girl of a certain age, and if he was any possibility of a match, then she was going to at least try to get close to him. People called her crazy up until the day she died, even though she had the scar on her neck, just under her chin to prove it. But she swore her whole life the man was trying to drink her blood, that he was a vampire. Comte de St Germain was, and still is, one of history's most mysterious characters. Supposedly he was born in 1621, and supposedly he died in 1784. Both are arguable. Not that he was born, but that he died. In early 1740s, St Germain, as he is better known these days, worked his way up to prominence in European high society in the mid-1700s. He was charming, fashionable, brilliant, handsome, and brave. He always had stories for the people of the highest regard in society, The list of music he wrote is as long as your arm, and the list of stories he told was even longer. He claimed to do incredible things with jewels, and implied that he had a host of jewels and precious metals in his possession. According to official death and burial documents, St. Germain died on February 27, 1784, and was buried on March 2nd. In his effects at the time of his death, the Count had a packet of paid and receipted bills and quittances, 82 Reichsdollars, and 13 shillings in cash, 29 various groups of items in clothing, including gloves, stockings, trousers, shirts, etc., 14 linen shirts, 8 other groups of linen items, and various sundries, razors, buckles, toothbrushes, sunglasses, combs, etc. There were no diamonds, jewels, gold, or any other riches. There were no kept cultural items from travels, personal items, like his beloved violin, or any notes of correspondence. He supposedly was 88 years of age, and looked to be in his 40s. In 1902, a man who appeared to be in his 40s, going by Jacques St Germain, claiming to be a descendant of the Count St Germain, moved into the prestigious building at the corner of Ursulines and Royal. His first introduction into New Orleans society was a party he threw, where he invited all the elite of New Orleans, dignitaries and politicians. He fed them from a catered menu on the finest china and silverware, yet he didn't eat a bite. All he did was drink what guests believed to be red wine. Jacques, while seemingly immensely rich, was never to fit in. He was described as charming, highly intelligent, and a master of languages and art, as was his supposed ancestor. But the company he kept, and the fact that he was known to behave like a ruffian and common folk, kept him from becoming one of the elite. One evening, Jacques picked up a woman at a local pub and taken her back to his home. The woman later finds herself at the police station with a fantastic tale. She stated St. Germain came at her with alarming speed and strength. He forced himself on her and bit her viciously on her neck. As Parajunkie stated in the online blog post, Mardi Gras celebrate New Orleans with vampires. As luck would have it, at that exact moment, a few of Jacques' more rowdy friends began banging at his door to lure him out for a drink. The pounding distracted Jacques enough for the woman to break away, but instead of trying to make it past Jacques, she decides to throw herself through the second-story window over the balcony that surrounds the property, to the bricked street below, thus resulting in her legs breaking in a few places. Her desperate screams drew the police, and they took her to the hospital and took her statement. Jacques, when questioned that night, stated only that she was drunk and decided to jump. Police asked if Jacques could come down to the station in the morning to give a formal statement. Jacques never appeared at the police station the next day. When they decided to pay him a visit, they found his house was abandoned and most of his things gone. Police took this as an invitation to inspect his home, and were confused by what they found. For one, there were bloodstains all over tablecloths in the house, and from what they could tell, they were from different time periods. Then, to top it off, there was not one piece of food in the house. Not even utensils or plates. Just a large collection of wine glasses and wine bottles filled with what police believed to be red wine, yet, upon tasting it, it was discovered that it was a mixture of blood and wine. Jacques St Germain was never seen again, though locals claimed to see him in different situations, even into the 20th century. Maybe sightings of the man stopped because the people who knew of him have all passed. Either way, he remains a legend to this day. Was he the legendary Count St Germain, or was it all a fiction conjured by a sick man who has long since passed? When New Orleans was being colonized, the Bishop of Quebec, on order of the French king, ordered young women of the right ages to go to the colony to marry men who were working hard to establish it. With the reports of the humidity, the mosquitoes, the alligators, and the muddy swamps, proper mesdemoiselles were less than motivated to move there. Most were gentlewomen of moderate upbringing, Some were nuns of the Roman Catholic Church, and some were prostitutes ready to make a decent living pleasing the men from the docks who deserved a good time. Of the women who came on their own, some of them had very intriguing luggage, shaped as coffins, called cassettes. They had very pale skin, and they were immediately burned red and blistered under the hot sun. The girls moved into the Ursuline convent in the French Quarter to be cared for by the nuns until such time as they were ready to be married off. La Fille à la Cassette, as they were called. The fate of the Casket Girls was not as was expected. The local men with which they were expected to marry and settle the area gravely disrespected the women. Some were placed into unwanted marriages, only to be mistreated by their husbands. Others, upon finding themselves alone and unwed, were forced into prostitution. The French king had had enough. He demanded the girls return to France. The sisters of the Ursuline convent then took the casket-shaped chests that had once carried everything that the Casket Girls had owned, and climbed the steps to the 3rd floor of the convent. Until this time, the windows and door to the 3rd floor had always been sealed shut, and they remained so at that time as well. But a short time later, when the nuns returned to the 3rd floor, they found that the chests were empty. They spared no section of the 3rd floor during their search, though the belongings were never recovered. Fearing that the young women might have been something other than what they said they were, the Ursuline nuns spared no expense in making sure that nothing ever left that 3rd floor space. The doors were bolted shut, the nails to the windows were blessed by the Pope himself and locked in place. In 1978, 2 reporters who heard the tale of the coffins wanted to go into the convent to film the coffins themselves. They were denied access, so instead, they decided to climb into the attic of the convent with their equipment. In the morning, the video equipment was found all over the street in front of the convent, and the men's bodies were found on the front steps, drained beyond the point of death. Their heads were nearly torn from their bodies. One legend that is largely overlooked in the extensive catalog of legends of New Orleans are the Carter brothers. John and Wayne Carter of New Orleans were seen by their peers as just dock workers, breaking their backs every day with hard manual labor in the muggy New Orleans heat. One day, a girl went running down the street covered in blood from an apartment building. She was rescued, and the police found cuts on her wrists. They weren't fatal, but just deep enough to allow for blood to flow. She told the police where she was being held. It was the apartment of John and Wayne Carter. When the police entered the apartment, they found 4 people inside also covered in blood with cuts just like the girls. One was dead. They had been there for days, some for over 7 days, which according to another legend is how long it takes for the giving and taking of blood to become a vampire. One of the people was a man named Philippe, who went on to commit his own murders, reportedly drinking the blood of all 32 of his victims. The Carter brothers were arrested and executed. In New Orleans, there is a tradition of placing your loved ones in a vault rather than the ground, lest the waters rise and your loved ones resurface in whatever state of decomposition they are at the time. When the next of the Carter family members were interred in the family vault, the bodies of the Carter brothers had disappeared without a trace. No remains at all. In the years to come, the Carter brothers were rumored to have been seen all over New Orleans, at this or that party or this or that dance hall, and not at all aged. But this all could be the works of active imaginations, right? There are tales and tales of supposed vampires in the Crescent City. In fact, there's a whole legion of people who call themselves vampires, whether they drink blood or psychic vampires, who feed off other people's life force. Though it is difficult to come across these people willingly, they are many in number, and somehow New Orleans has been considered their holy city. Maybe it has to do with the saga of the Anne Rice vampires and the troves of cult-like followers. Maybe it's the mystery and intrigue that the city has always held for everyone who has ever walked her streets. New Orleans has always attracted the mysterious, and with any luck, it always will. Hey, thanks again everybody for watching. If you like the content, go ahead and click the like button. And while you're at it, hit that big red button that says subscribe. Take care, and I'll see you soon.